Hey guys, it's Brant Within My Head channel, and today I've got a little bit different video today. I recently received some CDs, some video games in particular. Some I picked up in stores and others I picked up whenever we acquired an estate that was in our family. And I went through some of their tech stuff. Now, some of you who do not know that I'm also not only a McKiss nerd, but I'm also a tech nerd and a video game nerd, and don't get to play video games as much as I want to. I work in tech every day, and so I picked up these games, but they're older games. So this is actually going to be the first in the series of fixing up two potential computer systems to play games like Kiss Psycho Circus, Titanic Adventure Out of Time, Old School Roller Coaster Tycoon. I've had that for a while. I've had Titanic for a while. The original Sims, Monopoly, The Office, which I'm a huge fan of the show but never played that game, and NASCAR 2002. So I have two potential gaming systems that I can fix. Let me move my coffee cup here out of the way. It's a Sunday morning making videos. So this first one is a gateway, and it looks like it says it's a 614GE, and it's made for Windows XP. It says it has an Athlon 64 processor, 3400 plus. It has a 200 gig hard drive, which I'm not really concerned about that. 512 megs of RAM. A dual layer DVD plus R CD drive, which I'm not really concerned about that. Graphics is S3 Unichrome Pro IGP. Some things to note about it: it looks like it's been modified because it's got the original gateway bezel, and I owned a PC repair shop for 7 years and fixed a lot of these, and it was always a pain in the ass when these particular CDs went bad, because if you wanted it to keep the original stock look, you had to special order these, and they were more expensive just because of this front bezel. Below it, it looks like they've added another drive down here. Now that either means that this one doesn't work anymore and they just didn't replace it, so you don't have a hole, or they put this one in here, but this is also RW, so who knows. We'll find out more about that when we get into it. Another thing I liked about these is that they had these card readers on the front of them, and you know, I know a lot of people don't use desktop PCs anymore. Mostly they're used for gaming, and they're used in corporate environments and things like that. But I'm real excited about this because I remember these gateways being pretty good. I want to get inside of it and see what kind of board it has. And down here at the very bottom, it's just got some I/O slots down here. It's got FireWire, which was cool at the time, 2 more USBs, and a microphone input and a headphone and serial number and stuff like that. And you can a free subscription, or at least preloaded software to American Online. You've got mail. Alright, now checking out the back. This does not look like the original power supply, but we'll find out more about when we get into it. And I will probably most likely take this power supply apart and look at the capacitors in it just to make sure I don't have any swelled capacitors. I'll also look for that on the motherboard, and I'll make a decision at that time if I want to change those capacitors out or not, or if I just want to get a new motherboard. I don't know what I'll do at that time. The one thing that I did notice about this, it's got the discrete modem down here, probably a 56K modem. Those were the days, huh? Some of you older folks out there like myself remember these days very well. It's got a line-in microphone and head jack on the back. It's got 4 USBs, another FireWire, Ethernet port, parallel port, serial port, PS2 connectors, and integrated graphics. The back is held on with 2 thumb screws, and I like thumb screws. You have these down here where you could have actually, there's a little lock thing there where it could have been locked. That way people couldn't steal RAM out of the PC. And let's see what it looks like on the inside. It's relatively clean on the inside. There's some dust down here at the bottom. Now looking inside of it, it has 3 PCI slots and it has a video card slot. It's got the name, the model of the board here. It's MS6741. That's a MicroStar. I can tell just from working with them for all the years I worked with them. And it's got some other labels here for the different chips. But it's, so far for right now, it looks pretty clean. It's just dirty. Just needs to be cleaned up. And this thing may fire right up. I suppose I could do that before I go through all the trouble of seeing if it's actually going to power up. See if the power supply is not fried. If I don't get any power, I've got the ability to check the battery voltage. I've got a voltmeter. We can unseat and reseat the RAM. There is RAM there. There's an open slot beside it. So we can add another 512. Probably I'll have to look up the specs on the MS6741 and see if we can go to a gig of RAM. That was kind of common. This may be, most likely we can either go to a gig of RAM by putting another 512 in here, or we can put a 1 gig stick here and another 1 gig stick and put in 2 gigs of RAM. That may be overkill for what we're trying to do. We'll have to look at the games and see what the max recommended RAM is. And we definitely want to make sure that we do that, because we want to make sure that we're able to play the games. And I also want to take the video card that I've got and make sure that it will actually go into this slot. I'll have to go into the other room and get it, but we want to make sure that it will fit in this slot here. So we'll have to check that out. And we'll just check and make sure that all the fans are working. So let me go ahead and get this plugged up and we'll check it out and see if we get anything on the screen. I'm going to hook the power supply up last. I'm just paranoid sometimes about power. I've hooked stuff up in my shop before when I had my shop and start smelling smoke. So USBs. You ever notice USBs, it's never the right way the first time? You always have to turn it. It's never goes in the right way the first time. VGA adapter. I'm not gonna bother screwing it in. Go ahead and turn the monitor on and let's plug up. No smoke, no nothing. Sometimes the fans will spin, but I didn't get anything. So let's go ahead and hit the power button and see what happens. Okay, CPU spinning. The fan at the back is spinning. The power supply fan is spinning. And we have a screen. And it looks like I hear hard drive activity. And it is booting. Booting into Microsoft Windows XP. I tell you, if you don't have an XP system in your house, a lot of people don't anymore. They've moved on to bigger and better, Vista. Well, I don't know if that was necessarily better than Windows 7, then Windows 8, now Windows 10, which is what most people have now. And I'm going to take this off of the screen here just because I don't know what that's actually getting ready to show. I remember one time it's not showing anything bad. It's showing fish. It's showing a desktop. So I can show that again. I can kind of put that right there. I remember one time I had a person bring a PC in to my store, and I booted it up, and right there on the screen, it was a female that brought it in, and right there on the screen, the desktop, was a picture of her topless. And yeah, it was like, okay, I don't know if she wanted me to see that or if she just happened to forget that she had herself topless on her desktop. But I was blushing a little bit, to be honest, when she came in and picked her PC up. I was blushing. So what I want to do, I'm definitely going to reinstall Windows XP on this. It's got a product key on the back. But if you listen, if you hear, This hard drive is still just going and going and going and going. And see, it looks like it's trying to install something. So these type of systems, they were notorious for having bloatware. They'd have all this crap on them. And here it is, it's asking me for some solution feature center from a CD-ROM that I don't have. And you know, it's kind of like stepping back in a time capsule. Zune, y'all remember Zune? And Avast free antivirus. I mean, that's still a thing, but this is probably when it first came out. Malwarebytes, anti-malware, so they knew what's up. I mean, they had Avast free on there, and they had Malwarebytes on there. They knew what was up. But I'm going to reinstall the OS on this regardless of whether it works or how it works, because I want a clean install. I'll have the drivers downloaded all ahead of time, and I'll probably do all that behind the scenes. I won't bore you with all that install, but let's just kind of get into the system here. I'm going to cancel this, and it's trying to reinstall again. That's kind of suspicious. Luckily, I did not hook this up to my network, because I don't plan on hooking it up to my network, because there's no reason to. The name is just owner, so that's really weird. They didn't personalize it. I'm not going to go into their stuff, because I don't know whose this was, and I really don't care. So let's just go into the control panel here, and let's find out a little bit about the system. Registered to nobody, so I don't have to blur that out. This is XP Home Edition Service Pack 3, and it looks like it's the original install, because the original install has this gateway here and says it's supported by gateway, and if I do a stock Windows XP install, that will not be there. It says it's a 614GE. I'm apparently not exactly right on the processor, because it says it's AMD Athlon 64 3400 plus, but it's running at 2.4 gigahertz with 448 megabytes of RAM, and so that's okay. That's great. That's more than the processor we will probably need. Device Manager is where I want to go next. Want to just look and see if there's anything missing. Imaging devices, there's OfficeJet, so whoever had this also had an OfficeJet printer. Disk drives, the USB looks good, Western Digital drive there. I'll go into the BIOS and make sure that the drive is good. Display adapters. It's got an onboard VIA S3G Unichrome 2 graphics. Blah, blah. No good. We will hopefully not have to use that, and I can either have a video card that will work, or I can get a video card that will work. It's using a VIA Rhine 2, so this apparently has a VIA chipset. Everything else looks good. Athlon 64. What sound is it using? What onboard sound? Okay, cool. Realtek AC97 audio for RIA. Okay, so that's cool. We got Realtek audio. I'm not really so concerned about adding an audio card into here. It's just I'm okay with whatever audio card that it has on it. Looks like it's a pretty good, decent system. It just needs to be taken apart, checked out, and like I said, I know that's probably overkill for most people, but that's what I'm going to do, because if I don't want to put this in there in my room and set it up to start using it for retro gaming and then turn around and have an issue with it because there's a capacitor in the power supply that's gone bad, or there's something that's gone bad somewhere. So I want to go ahead and address and look at those issues now. So I want to go ahead and take the power supply out, take the motherboard out, and just go ahead and give those a good looking over and see and make sure that we don't have any issues or any bad capacitors. Bad capacitors is the biggest thing I'm looking out for, because these were manufactured during a time when there was a lot of bad capacitors floating around in the industrial marketplace. It affected everything from computers to televisions to just about everything. So there was a problem with the electrolytic compound that's inside of there, and it would break down early and they would start to swell up like old soup cans, and sometimes even bust open and catch on fire. So we want to make sure that we don't have any of that. Alright, now I pretty much had to remove the power supply in order to take it apart and make sure that everything's okay with it. But now that I've gotten everything taken loose, and I took some pictures of where everything went, even though it is color coded, on a lot of these on this board you see down here there's red and there's green and there's black, and that kind of coincides with the red and the blue and the green of the wires down here. And these basically is the power wire, the reset wire, and probably the hard drive activity light. And but you get a better view down here. So you see that it is the VIA chipset. This is what we call the South Bridge chipset. And up here is the North Bridge chipset, and under here, under this big bulky heat sink, is the CPU. And I'm not going to take that off because it seems to be working fine. I am going to take some canned air and I'm going to blow that out. I'm going to blow these out. I'm going to clean up the inside of the case. But I don't think I need to take this out because everything looks good. If you look over here, the capacitors I'm primarily concerned about are the ones that help filter power and supply a steady voltage for the CPU. Those are primarily going to be these capacitors right here, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. But it's primarily going to be these capacitors right here. And you've got, you know, these are amps, and you have inductors here. And so you have capacitors here. And then along the bottom here, there's some capacitors there. They look like little soup cans. I used to think when I was little, when I first started working on circuit boards, and I've been working on circuit boards for a long time. I worked for IBM for 10 years. I used to build motherboards. And I used to think that circuit boards looked like little cities, that the chips looked like houses, and the traces looked like roads. The little small resistors and capacitors looked like cars, and that these big ones look like the big oil drums or oil tankers that they keep water in or keep oil in and stuff like that. So it always reminded me of a city or a town, something like that. But you see here that these capacitors, if you look at the top of them, and I'm going to zoom in really close, you see that the top of these capacitors are perfectly flat. They're perfectly flat. Now sometimes they'll bulge out of the bottom, but when they bulge out of the bottom, they'll start turning sideways. They'll start turning sideways a little bit. But if you see, these capacitors are perfectly flat on the board, and they're perfectly flat on top. They're not bulging at all, especially the bigger ones. Like you really want to look for, let me zoom out a little bit, you want to look at the bigger ones. So like these right here are some of the primary ones, and they're perfectly flat on the top. So I'm not, here's some up here too, kind of hiding up here next to the inductor. Let me kind of turn this here, and you can see a row of them just kind of going, you can see a row of them kind of going down through there like that. These all are very important, and it's a pain in the ass to change these if you have to change them. And I mean, if you do have to change them, you either change them or get a new motherboard. But these are usually, one leg is usually on the ground plane. So And the ground plane is usually on the bottom side of the board. Is usually you have to have a really good soldering iron to heat it up and desolder it. So it's best. I'm not going to change them out just to be changing them out. So if I don't have to change them out, I'm not going to change them out. Another thing of interest up here is what we call the CMOS battery, and that's right here. It's just a watch battery, but what it does is it keeps the time whenever the motherboard is turned off, the computer's turned off, and I did not notice if the time was correct. So when we get it all fired back up, we'll go into the BIOS. That is the kind of the OS for the motherboard. We'll go into that. And we'll see if the time is right, if the time and the date is right. If it's off, it'll be way off. Like it'll be reset to what the original manufacturer date of the BIOS is or whatever date they defaulted, but it will not be today's date or today's time. And this has probably been unplugged. It was unplugged when I found it, so it's probably been unplugged for the good part of 3 to 4 years. But believe it or not, I've seen CMOS batteries last that long. And if not, then we just pop it out. There's a little tab here. We pop it out. We put a new one in there, and we're back in business. So, and you see where everything plugs in. Here's where the hard drive plugs in. Here's where your disk drives would have plugged in. Down here, if we wanted to put a SATA drive, this is what's called an IDE drive because it has the pins. But if we wanted to put a SATA drive in here, or put a solid state drive in here, which that is still an option. We would use these SATA connections down here. So those are called SATA connectors. And we have all of our headers, which is what we call them headers. That's where our front interface things, our USB, things like that hooked up. And yeah, so that's basically it. It has 2 power connectors. There's the larger power connector and then this smaller power connector here. This usually just supplies additional voltage to the board. A lot of your older ones just had this connector. Some of your newer boards even have more power connections than this because of what motherboards do these days in high-end gaming systems. The motherboard requires more power. So let's go ahead and take a look at the power supply. Now, even if the power supply doesn't need to be taken apart to look at the capacitors, because I can kind of see the capacitors through the grill. I can't see all of them, but I can see them. Now, I can tell you that earlier I said that I think that this wasn't an original power supply, but now that I've got it out, I believe it is, because this is a Best Tech power supply. And from what I remember, whenever I used to work on these things on a daily basis, the Best Techs are pieces of crap. So if I was going to be putting some high-end video card in here or whatever, I may change this power supply out. But I'm trying to get this up and running on a budget using parts that I already have and not trying to overdo it if I don't need to overdo it. So I think what I'm going to do with this one is I'm just going to take the screws out and then I'm going to check out the capacitors on the inside and then blow it out with some air. So this is just your standard power supply of the day. It has the primary connector and it has the secondary power connector. Then it just has a couple Molex connectors. This would have been for a floppy drive, which it doesn't have. And here's more Molex connectors with for a floppy drive. What it doesn't have is SATA power connectors. So SATA power connectors are individual little blade connections where these are power like prongs and pins. And if I want to put a SATA device in here like a solid state drive or something like that, I would have to either get something that uses Molex power connectors, or I would have to, if it used SATA, I'd have to get an adapter, which they make adapters that adapt this to a SATA connection, and they're very cheap. You can buy them off Amazon, eBay, Newegg, things like that. So, but let's get into this power supply. All right. So here's the underside of the circuit board. We want to be careful not to touch anything because these capacitors can hold a charge and they will light your ass up. So you have to be careful when you're working with electronics, especially in things like older electronics like TVs. Those capacitors can hold charges long after they're turned off unless that capacitor is shunted to ground, and then it will, you know, it may lose its charge. Okay, so on the inside here, it looks pretty clean. I'm going to kind of put it here where you can see. What it looks like here is we've got the amps, and the amps have their heat sinks, and then we have some coils, some induction coils. We have two big, large capacitors over here. These are the ones I was concerned about. Those capacitors look good, and they're perfectly flat on the bottom. They're perfectly flat on the top. No signs of bubbling whatsoever. But everything looks good. The resistors look good. All the capacitors look good. If you kind of look at it from the side, you can see that they're all just perfectly flat on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and get this power supply put back together and get this stuff blown out. I'm going to take the stuff outside to do that, and then I'm going to button it all back together and come back after that. So the only thing we have left to do in here is I'm going to power it back up here in just a minute to make sure everything's hooked back up right. The only thing I'm concerned about is if one of these drives is bad, if maybe it was unplugged for a reason because it was bad and it caused some kind of adverse effects. But we'll look at that as we go. The only other thing I want to talk about before we power it back up is that this is the card that I wanted to use in here. It's an MSI. It's made by MSI, and this is an NVIDIA. It's an NX 8500 GT. And I really wanted to use it in this because I've used this in others. It's got HDMI output. It's got DVI output. It doesn't have VGA output, but I was okay with it not having VGA output because I can adapt this from DVI to VGA. But the problem is it doesn't have the proper connector on the inside. So I'm going to have to try to find a video card that will fit this system that will play the games that I want to play. But that shouldn't be too hard. There's a lot at thrift stores around here, so I should be able to do that. What I will do is I will look at the games and I will see which game requires the most RAM, which game requires the best type of video card, and then I will begin to kind of hone in on that. So we're going to go ahead and hook everything back up, and I want to power this back up, and I want to check out these drives and see what's the deal with these drives. Had it right the first time. Had it right the first time that time. Alright. Power it up. It's going to give us some options, some F options. Bias settings, delete. These days it's like the boot menu is like F12. The bias is F2, things like that. Okay, so standard CMOS features. Let's put it there so we can see a little better. And let's see here. Look at that. 14/21, November 24th, 2019. And that is 1 hour off because it's 1:42. So that'd be 2:52. It's about an hour and 10 minutes off, which is actually pretty crazy that it's that close. So I'm going to go ahead and set it. November 24th. And that is correct. So we're going to save and exit. We're going to enter power. And hard drive light. Now I don't know if you saw that there, but it says press F11 to start recovery. That F11 to start recovery is typically, if there's a recovery partition on the computer, then it will start off, it will boot to that recovery partition and give you the option to take it back to factory setting. And it will include all the drivers and things like that. But it will also include the bloatware. So I have a decision to make. I need to look at Gateway's website and see if they even have XP drivers available on their website, because I don't have the drivers discs for this. I don't have any discs for it. And some recovery partitions were tricky, especially with compacts, because what they did was they also would require discs. It's like the recovery partition was just getting you started, and then they needed the information off the discs, and the discs were particular to your model. Like there was OS, and then there was usually a drivers and then an application. So I don't know exactly how this is set up. I know that was really big with compacts. I don't think that was such a big thing with gateways. At this point in time, what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to go ahead and see if I can recover from the recovery partition, and because I would like to know if that still works. And if I can recover from the recovery partition, then I would like to do that, and then we can uninstall bloatware and things like that if needed to be. And I think that is the shortest, could be maybe not the shortest way, but it's the way that I want to try to do it first. The recovery partition may not even exist anymore, but I believe it does, because this is all still Gateway branded and things like that. And plus that prompt to reboot from, or boot, press F11 to boot recovery, is usually built into the boot sector somewhere. And if you wipe the hard drive and install XP fresh, you don't get that option anymore. That option goes away. So, or it may still be there and it'll say recovery partition not found. What I'm going to do for now is we're going to shut it down and we're going to reboot it and boot that recovery partition. Alright, so we're booted back up here, and we're going to try to wait for that F11 prompt. Okay, there's the F11 prompt. So it says preparing system recovery options. So fingers crossed. That looked like I was gigging you, but I wasn't. Fingers crossed. It looks like it is going to go into the recovery. So let's see what kind of options we have here. So we have options for a non-destructive system restore, and what this does is it recovers factory shipped applications, but it will not delete any files that you've created. And this is really good, like if the system starts acting stupid, or if you took something off of it that you wanted, but you don't want to lose your data, you don't want to back that up, you don't want to worry about backing that up. But we're not too concerned about that. We are going to go ahead and do what's called a destructive system, and it's a full system restore. This option will format your hard drive and reinstall all the factory shipped files. Use this as all other options fail to restore the machine to satisfactory condition. All your personal files and applications will be lost. So what this will do, there's two partitions on here. There's a recovery partition that's hidden, typically hidden, and then there's the operating system partition, and that's what it's going to do. And you have some advanced options down here, and you can do a full system restore with backup. It'll basically move your hard disk contents to a My Backup directory and install new copies of Windows. It reserves your existing data files. New applications and settings will need to be reinstalled. So we're not going to worry about that. What we're going to do with this one is we're going to go for the full system destructive restore. We're going to click next. All files, including data files on the user partition, will be lost, and the original factory shipped files will be recovered. Do you want to continue? Yes. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to format that hard drive, format that partition, and then it will begin copying over the files. Now there's a couple ways that it does this. Typically I've saw in the past. It will sometimes copy over an image using an application like something like Windows Ghost or Semantic Ghost, and it will recover from an image, which is a large way that we recover a lot of operating systems today, or install operating systems today, as we install from an image. So that could be what it's doing. It could be using in the background using this ghost partition, this ghost image off of the recovery partition to restore things. Right now it looks like, if you look, it shows you, it's kind of cool, it shows you the status. It says time elapsed is almost a minute, time remaining is 8, it's 27% completed, and it says it's restoring XP application files, and right now it's recovering everything inside of the Windows System 32, which is basically your operating system. That is your operating system for this PC or for Windows. Most of the operating system files is in the System 32 folder. Okay, so it basically looks like it's going through a Windows startup here for the first time. It says please wait while Windows prepares to start. And the recovery may take over here because it still has to do applications and things like that. Which I wish there was a way that you could just do the application or do the Windows XP setup and the drivers and not all the applications. That would be cool if they let you do that. Now, one thing that I did leave out while this is loading, one thing that I did leave out is how I clean and what I clean with. And while that's doing its thing, we're going to look back over here at the system. What I typically clean, if I'd have opened this up and this would have been caked, if the motherboard would have been caked with gunk or whatever, I usually clean this type of stuff with a very pure alcohol, like as high alcohol content as you can get, like 98%, 99%. You want to wear gloves because that stuff will, it won't eat you up, but it'll dry you up. And jumping back over here, it is doing its gateway branding software setup. And that's the part that I wish it would let you pick and choose what you wanted to put back on. But back over to here, I cleaned the boards with a alcohol, very pure alcohol. And you want to let it dry very well, of course, because liquid and electricity does not mix. When it comes to the cases and things like that, I clean with either a mixture in a squirt bottle that is about 2 parts vinegar and 1 part water, or 50-50. And it's almost equivalent. If you're in a bind, some Windex will do, but Windex with vinegar. If you can get the Windex with vinegar, but you can, white vinegar and toothbrushes. Old toothbrushes work really good. Compressed air, of course, that you can get in the cans. You do not want to use compressed air out of an air compressor because it may blow oil from the air compressor valves. And I preface that because I saw on YouTube one time a guy blowing his computer out with an air compressor. And yeah, you don't want to do that. Compressed air, and you want to hold the can straight. You don't want to try to blow the liquid nitrogen onto everything. But this cleaned up, as you can see, it cleaned up really well. I'm going to kind of go down in here and you can see that the bottom is very clean now, and it wasn't that dirty. I have seen much dirtier before. I have seen, in my years of working on computers, I have seen, we'll go back to here because it's doing stuff. Okay, it's installing drivers. So it's installing the S3 VIA driver, and black screen because boom, now it's come up with the new driver, and it says, hey, you found new hardware. It's installing Norton Antivirus 2005. 2005. So that kind of dates the PC there. This is a 2005 model. So 14 years old. Not bad. 14 years old and still kicking it. And probably served somebody very well for a very long time. But in my years working on PCs and laptops and electronics, I have opened them up and they have been covered in nicotine and tar. I've opened them up and had a rat's nest in one where there was a little slot missing out of the very bottom down here, and just big enough for a rat to get into, and all down in this area, all here was a rat's nest. Luckily there wasn't a rat in it, but I have done that. Roaches, I've opened it up and invaded the roach motel. That has not been fun. Usually when I had that happen, I usually boxed it up and put it inside of a plastic bag and sprayed this really powerful roach killer down inside of it, inside the bag, and then sealed the bag, and it usually killed them all. And a lot of times that was their problem. The roaches they love power supplies because power supplies are warm, and they love power supplies, so they get up in there and they're short across something and they would blow something up being shorted across it. It's now installing the system manual. This is stuff that is just, hopefully I'll just turn around and take back out. I'll probably keep this system stock the way it is and see if it will play games without putting in a video card. I'll probably initially start it that way, go ahead and install the games and see what games will play, and then if I'm not happy with the performance, I will put in a AGP video card. So it's done some other things here. It's installed JavaNet framework, it's installed Money, it's installed .NET framework. Right now it's installing AOL 9.0. It's installing all of the bloatware that I don't really care for, I don't really want, and honestly is obsolete in today's standards. And is AOL even a thing now? Can you still dial in? Does anybody still have AOL? Is anybody actually getting dial-up service from AOL anymore? I mean, I don't even really know. But once it gets booted up, all of this stuff I will attempt to uninstall all of this. I think the only way that I'm going to go with a clean install of XP on this one is if I cannot get it to clean up the bloatware the way that I like, because I do like it being Gateway branded. So I'm going to try to stick with the Gateway install, just clean it up. Still installing AOL though. So after about 20 minutes of doing its thing, it ended up here at the Welcome to Microsoft Windows. And I don't know exactly how much of this I'm going to be able to do, because I know some of it requires an internet connection, like activating XP. I may have to do that through the phone if it asks. But we're going to set me here in Eastern Time. We're going to agree to these agreements. This is the Microsoft one, and this is the Gateway one. We're not going to turn on automatic updates because there are none, and I'm not really concerned about them because this isn't going to be on the internet. Computer name is your whatever. I'm going to name this one XP Machine. It's going to think about it a second. It's either going to come up and ask us to activate, or it's going to take us straight to our desktop. Checking connectivity, which we don't have any. Thank you. You're good to go. So we finish. First thing I want to do is we want to look for, it's got all this stuff running, QuickTime. I want to do Control Panel. It's got McAfee Security Center. It's got Norton Antivirus, McAfee Security Center, Sound Effect, QuickTime. Oh yeah, all this stuff. Let's look at the Task Manager and see how much RAM is even being used right now. So here's all the stuff that's running right now, and we're using 182 of our 500 megs of RAM. So we want to remove some things. Want to remove the stuff we don't want. I don't know if I need Adobe Reader for anything. You never know, some game may use it for documentation. But we're going to remove AOL. And man, it's been so long since I've seen an AOL installation. Is anybody watching this remember bulletin boards? Did you ever log on to a bulletin board? I used to go to bulletin boards. It was mostly to find pictures of naked women. I'm going to go down and I'm going to install this McAfee Security Center first. And I want to see if it does all this crazy stuff. Okay, it's saying I need to uninstall other stuff first. So let's uninstall the McAfee spyware. So let's remove Norton, remove all. I don't even know how full the hard drive is. Let's take a look at that. It's yeah, mostly empty. That's good. Nero, wow, I used to burn many a disc with Nero. It's kind of like a walk down memory lane with some of these older PCs with software bundled in. A little bit of a walk down memory lane. We're waiting on Norton to finish here. Like I said, I know a lot of you out there would probably be like, why are you going through this trouble of removing these programs that you really shouldn't have installed shouldn't have installed in the first place? And like I said, I haven't looked it up to see if the Gateway website still has these drivers, but if they don't, for Windows XP, if it still has support, if they don't, it can become looking for a needle in a haystack. We don't need port magic, so we're going to remove it. And I'm saying no on all these restarts. It's just going to have to be registry changes. Windows backup utility, I don't know. I'm going to leave that. This S3 stuff, I'm going to leave. Realtek, Real Player, I'm going to leave. Power DVD, I'm going to leave. Nero, I'm going to leave. Multimedia keyboard driver, I'm going to remove because I'm not using the same keyboard that came with it that has all the buttons. Works, that's like the poor man's office that don't even exist anymore. I'm going to leave that. Picture It, I'm going to leave. Live Reg, I think I can remove now. It probably already got removed. Learn to Player, I'm going to remove that. Java, I'll leave for now. Digital Media Reader, Big Fix, I'm going to remove. These old uninstalled shields. Seeing some of these old graphics and these old uninstalled programs, it's a little bit of nostalgia. AOL You've Got Pictures screensaver, AOL Toolbar, AOL Bloat, AOL Bloat, yes to all. AOL Spyware Protection, good gosh, yes to all. What it's saying is basically, hey, we're removing this file and we feel like nothing else is going to use it, so can we remove it? And you just say, sure, yeah, I don't need it. I'm going to go ahead and let this reboot, and then once it reboots, I'm going to clean up the startup, and so I try to get as little starting up as possible. Okay, so we're back at the desktop here. So what I want to do is I want to try to stop as much from starting up as possible. So I'm going to start run, and I'm going to type msconfig. A lot of that is available on the task manager now in Windows 10, but right now it's showing a normal startup. Now starting up as far as here goes, yeah, there's some things I might want to check out, like NeroCheck. I don't really care if NeroCheck starts up. QuickTime Task, I don't care if it starts up. Cyberlink Power DVD, I don't care if it starts up. And so everything else looks fine to me there, so we'll close and we're just going to restart, and we're going to see how that restarts back up. And so after that, we will move on to seeing what is the deal with the DVDs, and once we get the DVD CD drives fixed, then we will move on to trying to load in a game. I want to load that Kiss game in first, and we'll load that Kiss game in and see if it actually plays on this system. Alright guys, I'm back, and I got the fast forwarded a little bit. This is the next day. I got the system up and running. You see that it's running, and I have the two drives are both hooked up. The CD drives are both hooked up, the top one here and the second one, and they both work. I've tested them off camera, but I'm going to show you. We're going to put in a game here in just a minute, and I'd actually like to load the Kiss Psycho Circus. That's the one. That's the first one that I would really like to play on this system. So that's the first one. We'll go through that installation, but I'm going to go ahead and remember we talked about this board. We talked about, and I'm sorry the light's not that great in here, but it is later in the evening today. I get in after work, and you see that this is a MS, we talked about the being an MS6741. And I looked up the specs on the MS6741. It's a MicroStar board. It's using the VIA V8T100 chipset. It's a micro ATX form factor. It's a socket 754. It supports up to 2 gigs of RAM. So it does DDR 266, 333, and 400, and it does have those 2 sockets up here that will each take a gig of RAM each. I don't know if I'll upgrade to that. We'll see what the games, because I don't know what the games really want to support. And then we were talking about video graphics and talking about these ports down here. So what this basically has in it is right here, it has a AGP slot. That's a 4X and an 8X, the red connector there. I looked at AGP cards today, video cards, and depending on what you want to get, they run anywhere between 20 bucks on eBay, and there's some that's ridiculously priced, that's more rare, that's 100, 200. So I'm going to try to find something and maybe try to spend a budget of 20, 30 bucks on it. In today's money, that's not too bad. And it's got 3 PCI slots, the beige ones here, and there's a CNR slot down at the bottom, which you see that used a lot with modems and stuff like that. And then, like I said, 2 DIMM sockets. We already talked about the ports on the back. I'm going to use each one of these drives. I've already tested them. We're going to put it in the top drive here, and we're going to. This is the Psycho Circus that I just put in. I don't have the speakers hooked up. So it says Kiss Psycho Circus, the Nightmare Child. And typically what it'll do is as it goes through the installation, it will check and make sure that you've got the right kind of hardware, or hardware that will support what you're wanting to do with this game. So we're going to click next. We're going to say yes. It's going to put it under C, Games Psycho. We'll say next. Going to go with the typical installation. It's going to put it in program folder, Kiss Psycho Circus, the Nightmare Child. We're going to say next, and it's going to start installing the game. And don't know if this is a game that you have to have the CD in to run, or if it's going to copy the whole contents of the CD, and then you just have to put the CD in to do a check to make sure that you have purchased the game, that you didn't download it. A lot of times the digital rights management, the DRM, they have different kinds of things. On some of the games, it uses a key. Like there's a key, I'm going to cover part of it, but you see there's a key right there on the front of the game. And some of the games did that. Some of them, they had registration, that you had to register the game. But a lot of them, it was if you just had the game itself, you would just have to put the game in. I think that the Roller Coaster Tycoon is that way. It checks to see if you have the physical game. And it can't just be a burned copy of the game. It has to be an actual copy. They have somewhere on a sector there where it checks for that. It checks for something that's hidden. And, you know, there was all kinds of cracks and stuff that used to come out. I think I had a cracked version of Roller Coaster Tycoon at one time. And basically it was an application that you ran or the game had been hacked in a way where it didn't check for the CD, or the executable had been hacked to where it assumed that the CD was in the drive, and something like that. So I don't know exactly how Circus is going to do it. We'll find out once we get it done. I'm going to take the disc out and try to start the game and see what it does. So it's about 50% done here. It's really spinning. The drive sounds really good. It doesn't sound like it's too worn out. Or I've heard some of these where it sounds like an airplane taking off. And one time I had a drive in my shop. I was doing something, I was installing something, and I heard this big bang in the store. And I couldn't figure out what it was until a little while later. I went to go take that disc out of that computer. It was a disc that I had probably a lot of my programs on that I used to debug and remove viruses and things like that. This was kind of before USB flash drives became a big thing. And I opened the drawer, and the drawer wouldn't open. And once I finally shook it and got it to come out, I could see fragments of a disc, and the disc had basically shattered inside of the high-speed drive. And so I had to actually remove the drive, take it apart, clean all the glass and plastic, or clean all the plastic from the disc out of it, and basically put it back together. So yeah, it's crazy to hear of a disc shattering in a drive, but I've known it to do it, and it's happened to me myself. While this is finishing up, I've had people ask me before, I'll kind of zoom out a little bit, I've had people ask me about the desk that I'm working at. This is the actual desk that I used to do when I first started. I did my videos at. This is the what I call the piano desk. And up above me is the Walking Dead memorabilia that I own. And it's my box sets and limited editions. And behind here is a piano. And you can see back here are the actual strings. It actually does play. If you hit over here, if I go down here a little bit, you'll see that some of the lower keys, some of the lower strings. And so the harp part of it is still intact. Okay, so it's made it past the Psycho Res. Apparently that is a huge file, and it took it almost up to 80%. So that looks like it's putting in music. Putting in music, menus. It's at 91%, and it looks like it's going to finish up. The Psycho Res was probably the primary graphics for the game. If I was a betting man, and I've known to be sometimes, I would probably think that that is what that was. It was probably the primary graphics, primary images for the games. Right now it's just putting in music. And then when this gets done, I'm going to eject the disc, put my disc back. Well, I'm going to eject the disc and try to play the game. Put my disc back in and see. And if it does work, that'll be the end of this video. I may make update videos in the future. If I add a graphics card or add more RAM to it, I will do things of that nature. I don't know exactly when I'm going to do that. It all depends on if the other games I have to install will run on the existing hardware, or if I'm going to need a better graphics card, or if I'm going to need or if I'm going to need more RAM. So it's done. So we should see games, Kiss Psycho Circus. Alright, just want to remove the disc and see if it even prompts for a disc. Alright, no disc. It's not prompting for a disc. So now we're going to say play. Before running the game for the first time, please choose display button so that your video devices can be enumerated. Alright, so let's do that. The available video options on your system will now be enumerated. This may take some time depending on what hardware is installed. Please insert the game. So I'm going to insert my game. Okay, tried to open another lander. All right. So we got a menu screen here, or a credit screen. And like I said, I don't have speakers hooked up. But it's looking pretty good so far. See if we make it to the main menu. There it is. There is the main menu. Hope this don't just play the first time that you start the game, because I would really like to hear all of this, because it looks like it's going through a story that it often does the first time you play the game. So I'm going to escape. There we go. So yeah, so we're here at the screen. We're here at the main menu now. So I'm just going to click. I'm going to exit out of this. I'm going to hit escape. Exit Nightmare Child, yes. I'm going to remove my game out of it. And so there, kiddos. We have it. There it is. So there you have it, guys. The Gateway 614GE PC, XP PC. And I'm hoping to be able to play all of these games on it. If not, we'll modify it however we are able to modify it. I did not put the modem back in because I didn't see a reason to. And that left an open slot in the back, but that's okay because I do actually plan on at some point in time, just for giggles, putting that AGP video card in there. And speaking of video cards, we'll save this one for another project. Probably when we get up into a newer type of machine, maybe a Windows 7 PC or something like that, we'll slap this in that. So that's all for this video. For those of you who've stuck around to this part, I'm going to show you the next thing I'm going to be working on, and that is this. This is something else that I found in the estate. It's a Kenwood KR2600 receiver, and it's in need of a lot of love, and I've not even powered it up yet. I'm going to open it up and look into it, and we're going to see what it takes to get this power AM/FM stereo receiver going again. So this is what you've got to look forward to for the next video. This is the next thing I'll be working on. I appreciate you watching, guys, and I'll see you all next time.